Jessica Monroe stood in the master suite of the Greenwich estate, her hands trembling as she held the embossed invitation that had arrived that morning. The November air carried a crisp bite through the half-open French windows, and the distant Long Island Sound stretched grey and turbulent beneath gathering storm clouds. In exactly 48 hours, she would walk down the aisle of St. Mark's Episcopal Church to marry William Hartford III, heir to the Hartford commercial real estate empire, a fortune built on Manhattan skyscrapers and New England shopping centers worth over $3 billion. She had met William 18 months earlier at a charity gala in Manhattan, where his easy charm and seemingly genuine warmth had cut through the pretentious crowd like a lighthouse beam. He was different from the other trust fund heirs she'd encountered during her years working as a development director for arts non-profits, or so she had believed. The courtship had been whirlwind. Weekends in the Hamptons, winter skiing in Aspen, spring in Paris. His mother, Catherine Hartford, had been less enthusiastic about their engagement, making her disapproval clear with icy politeness at every family gathering. Now standing in the bedroom of the Hartford family compound, where she'd been staying for the week before the wedding, Jessica stared at her phone screen in disbelief. An email from an unfamiliar address contained a series of financial documents, wire transfers, property deeds, corporate filings. Her pulse quickened as she recognized names and dates. Catherine Hartford had been systematically embezzling from the Hartford Family Foundation for over 5 years, funneling millions into offshore accounts through a labyrinth of shell companies. The foundation was supposed to support women's shelters, youth programs, and medical research across Connecticut and New York. Jessica had seen Catherine accept awards for her philanthropic work, watched her give speeches about helping vulnerable populations, observed the Hartford name emblazoned on hospital wings and community centers. It had all been theater, a carefully constructed facade, while Catherine diverted funds meant for domestic violence survivors and at-risk children into her personal coffers. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text from William. "Mother wants to see you in the study. Now." Her stomach knotted as she descended the sweeping mahogany staircase, passing portraits of Hartford ancestors who gazed down with stern Yankee propriety. The study door stood ajar, and she could hear Catherine's voice, sharp, authoritative, accustomed to command. Jessica pushed the door open to find William standing beside his mother's massive desk, his expression unreadable. "Jessica," Catherine began without preamble, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her designer suit immaculate. "I understand you received some materials this morning. I want you to know that those documents are fabricated, a disgruntled former employee attempting to extort money from our family." Jessica's mouth felt dry. She glanced at William, searching his face for some sign of support, but his jaw was set, his eyes cold. "I've had someone look at them," Jessica said quietly. "They appear authentic. Bank routing numbers, signatures, dates that correspond with foundation reports." Catherine's expression hardened. "You had them verified? Without speaking to William first? Without coming to me?" "I needed to know if they were real," Jessica replied, her voice steadier than she felt. William stepped forward, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, he spoke. "Jessica, my mother has explained everything. This is clearly a shakedown attempt. We deal with this kind of thing regularly. The wedding is in 2 days. We can't have this distraction." "Distraction?" Jessica's voice rose despite herself. "William, if these documents are real, your mother has stolen millions from charities, from women's shelters, from programs that help abuse victims." Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "How dare you come into this family and make accusations? You're marrying into one of the most respected names in New England, and you repay that honor by believing lies." Jessica felt her composure fracturing. She had spent months trying to win Catherine's approval, enduring subtle put-downs about her middle-class background, her state school education, her family's modest home in suburban New Jersey. She had told herself it would improve after the wedding, that Catherine would soften once they were officially family. Now she understood. Catherine saw her as a threat, someone who might uncover secrets, ask uncomfortable questions. "I'm not making accusations," Jessica said carefully. "I'm asking questions. If the documents are fake, then we should report this to the authorities and clear your name." Catherine's laugh was cold. "Report it, and have our family name dragged through tabloid headlines right before the wedding? Have investigators crawling through foundation records during what should be a celebration? No. You will destroy those documents, Jessica. You will say nothing about this to anyone, and you will walk down that aisle Saturday with a smile on your face." Jessica looked at William, willing him to speak, to stand beside her, to acknowledge that his mother's response was wrong. Instead, he moved closer to Catherine, a subtle but unmistakable alignment. "Jessica, you need to let this go," William said, his tone flat. "This is family business. You're not part of this family yet." The words struck like a slap. She had spent 18 months building a relationship with this man, sharing her dreams, her fears, her hopes for their future together. She had introduced him to her parents, her childhood friends, her world, and now, faced with evidence of his mother's criminality, he chose Catherine's wealth and status over truth. "I can't let this go," Jessica whispered. "Those funds were supposed to help people who have nothing, people who've been hurt, who need protection." Catherine moved around the desk with predatory grace. "Then you're making a choice, Jessica. You can destroy your future with my son over documents you don't fully understand, or you can be smart. Be part of something bigger than yourself. The Hartford name opens doors. It creates opportunities. Don't throw that away over misplaced righteousness." Jessica's hands clenched at her sides. Through the study window she could see the manicured grounds of the estate, the tennis courts and pool house, the 6-car garage filled with luxury vehicles. Everything about this world suddenly felt hollow, beautiful surfaces concealing rot. "I need time to think," she managed. "You have until tomorrow morning," Catherine replied coldly. "The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow evening. Guests are arriving from London, Los Angeles, Dubai. This wedding will proceed as planned, and you will not embarrass this family." William reached for Jessica's arm, his grip firm. "Come on, let's talk privately." He led her out of the study and up to their bedroom suite, closing the door behind them with a decisive click. The moment they were alone, his demeanor shifted from cold detachment to something harder, more menacing. "What the hell are you doing?" William demanded. "My mother has given you everything, welcomed you into our family, planned this entire wedding, introduced you to people who matter, and this is how you repay her?" Jessica pulled away from him, creating distance. "William, she stole from charities, from foundations meant to help abuse victims. How can you defend that? You don't know what you're talking about." His voice rose, anger flashing in his eyes. "Foundation finances are complex. There are tax strategies, investment vehicles. You're a non-profit worker who makes $50,000 a year. You don't understand high-level finance." The condescension in his voice made Jessica's throat tighten. "I understand theft," she said quietly. "I understand that people donated money believing it would help vulnerable women and children, and your mother redirected it for personal use." William's face flushed red. "You need to shut up about this. Right now. Delete those emails, forget you ever saw them, and focus on our wedding." "Or what?" Jessica challenged, feeling something crystallize inside her, a core of resistance she hadn't known existed. His expression turned ugly. "Or you'll regret it. My mother has lawyers who could destroy you. Your reputation, your career, your family. Do you think your parents could afford to fight us? We'll bury you in litigation until you have nothing left." Jessica stared at the man she had planned to marry, seeing him clearly for the first time. The charm had been performance. The kindness had been calculated. He was Catherine's son in every way that mattered, willing to sacrifice anything, including integrity, to protect the Hartford fortune and name. "I'm going to my room," she said, her voice hollow. "I need to be alone." "This is your room," William snapped. "This is your life now. Get used to it." But Jessica was already moving toward the door, her heart pounding, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. She had 48 hours until a wedding that suddenly felt like a prison sentence, and in her phone she carried evidence that could expose one of Connecticut's most prominent families, if she had the courage to use it. Jessica spent a sleepless night in one of the estate's guest rooms, her phone clutched in her hand, as she studied the financial documents again and again. By dawn, she had made copies and sent them to a secure cloud account, then contacted Sarah Chen, a college friend who worked as an investigative journalist at the New York Times. Sarah's response came within an hour. The documents warranted serious investigation, but she would need corroboration and additional sources before publishing anything. The November morning broke cold and clear as Jessica dressed carefully, a cream silk blouse and tailored navy pants, armor for the confrontation she knew was coming. Downstairs, she found William and Catherine having breakfast in the sunroom, their conversation stopping abruptly when she entered. "Good morning," Jessica said evenly. "I've made my decision. I'm postponing the wedding until we can have these financial documents properly investigated by an independent auditor. Catherine set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. That's not acceptable. It's not negotiable, Jessica replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. If the documents are fabricated as you claim, an investigation will clear your name. If they're authentic, then the foundation's donors and the charities that should have received those funds deserve to know the truth. William stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward. Jessica, I told you to drop this. You're embarrassing yourself and insulting my family. Your family has embarrassed itself, Jessica shot back. I'm just asking for transparency. Catherine rose with glacial composure. William, escort your fiancée back to her room. She's clearly overwrought from wedding stress. I'll call Dr. Brennan to prescribe something for her nerves. I don't need medication, Jessica said firmly. I need honesty. I need you to explain why there are wire transfers from foundation accounts to companies registered in the Cayman Islands. I need you to explain why donors were told their contributions were funding domestic violence shelters while millions disappeared into offshore accounts. The air in the sunroom seemed to crystallize with tension. Catherine's perfectly controlled mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. You stupid little girl, Catherine hissed. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Women like you from nowhere families with nowhere careers, they dream of marrying into families like ours. And you're willing to destroy that over numbers in a ledger. Those numbers represent real people, Jessica said, her voice rising. Women fleeing abuse who couldn't get beds in shelters because the funding wasn't there. Children who didn't receive medical treatment because the programs were underfunded. All while you were buying another vacation property in Tuscany. William moved toward her with frightening speed, grabbing her upper arm hard enough to leave marks. Enough! You don't talk to my mother that way. You don't make accusations you can't prove, and you definitely don't threaten this family. Jessica tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. William, you're hurting me. Good, he snarled. Maybe that'll get through your thick skull. The wedding happens Saturday. You smile, you say your vows, and you keep your mouth shut about things you don't understand. Fear spiked through Jessica's chest, but alongside it rose anger, pure and clarifying. She had seen the truth of this family now, the violence barely concealed beneath the veneer of respectability. How many times had William's charm masked this capacity for cruelty? How many other women had Catherine destroyed to protect her secrets? Let go of me, Jessica said quietly, with absolute conviction. Or I'm calling the police right now. William released her with a shove that sent her stumbling backward into an antique console table. A crystal vase toppled, shattering on the marble floor with a sound like breaking ice. For a moment, everyone froze. William breathing hard, his face flushed, Catherine watching with narrowed eyes, Jessica catching her balance, her arm throbbing where his fingers had dug into her flesh. You've made your choice, Catherine said coldly. Pack your things and get out of my house. The wedding is cancelled, and if you breathe a word of your ridiculous allegations to anyone, I will destroy you. I will destroy your parents. I will make sure you never work in this city again. Jessica met her gaze without flinching. I already sent the documents to the New York Times. A reporter is reviewing them as we speak. The color drained from Catherine's face. William lunged toward Jessica again, but she was ready this time, moving quickly toward the sunroom door. Don't touch me again, she warned. I'm leaving now, but this isn't over. She ran upstairs, grabbed her purse and laptop, leaving behind the wedding dress hanging in the closet and the engagement ring on the dresser. Her hands shook as she called an Uber, then hurried down the service staircase to avoid Catherine and William. The driver arrived within 10 minutes, and as the estate gates closed behind her, Jessica felt something loosen in her chest. Relief mixed with terror at what she had just set in motion. She directed the driver to her parents' house in Montclair, New Jersey, a 45-minute drive that gave her time to call Sarah Chen and provide additional context for the documents. Sarah listened carefully, asking pointed questions about the Hartford family structure, the foundation's board members, and Jessica's relationship with William. This is serious, Sarah said finally. If these documents hold up to scrutiny, it's a major story. But Jessica, you need to understand the Hartfords have connections everywhere. Media, law enforcement, politics. This could get ugly. It's already ugly, Jessica replied, rubbing her bruised arm. They threatened me. William physically grabbed me. They'll do whatever it takes to keep this quiet. Then we need to move fast, Sarah said. I'm bringing in my editor and our financial analyst. Can you meet me at the office tomorrow morning? Jessica agreed, then ended the call as the driver pulled up to her childhood home, a modest colonial with a small front yard and her mother's carefully tended flower beds, now brown and dormant for winter. Her parents, both retired teachers, were shocked to see her arrive without warning, still more shocked when she explained what had happened. Her father, Tom Monroe, listened with growing anger as Jessica showed him the bruises forming on her arm where William had grabbed her. "We're filing a police report," he said immediately, "and you're done with that family. I don't care how much money they have." Her mother, Ellen, wrapped Jessica in a fierce hug. "I never liked him," she admitted. There was something calculated about the way he acted, like he was always performing. Jessica spent the afternoon giving a statement to the Montclair police about the assault, though the officer who took her report seemed skeptical that anything would come of it. "The Hartfords have a lot of pull in this area," he said carefully, "but we'll document everything. Make sure you take photos of those bruises and keep any threatening messages they send." As evening fell, Jessica's phone began exploding with messages, from friends who'd been invited to the wedding, from William's cousins and business associates, from distant acquaintances suddenly interested in the scandal. Most troubling were the texts from William himself, alternating between apologies and threats. "I'm sorry I hurt you, I was upset. Come back and we'll work this out." Then, 10 minutes later, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. My mother's lawyers are preparing a defamation suit." And finally, "You've humiliated my family, there will be consequences." Jessica blocked his number and activated all the privacy settings on her social media accounts. Then she sat down with her laptop and began writing out everything she could remember. Dates, conversations, interactions with Catherine and William, her observations about the Foundation's operations. If this was going to become a legal battle, she needed her own documentation. That night, lying in her old bedroom surrounded by high school trophies and college photographs, Jessica felt the full weight of what she'd done. She had walked away from a life of wealth and privilege, from access to power and influence, from the security that marrying William would have provided. But she had also walked away from complicity in Catherine's crimes and from a relationship built on lies. She thought about the women who should have been helped by the Hartford Foundation, survivors of domestic violence who had nowhere safe to go, who faced the impossible choice between staying with abusers or living on the streets with their children. Catherine had stolen their safety, their hope, their future, and William had chosen to protect his mother rather than stand for what was right. Jessica had made a different choice. Now she would have to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. The New York Times article ran 5 days later, on a Wednesday morning, that would change everything. Sarah Chen's carefully researched exposé laid out the full scope of Catherine Hartford's embezzlement. $12.7 million diverted from the Hartford Family Foundation over 6 years, routed through shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and Singapore. The article included interviews with foundation donors who had believed their money was supporting domestic violence shelters and youth programs, along with devastated statements from non-profit directors whose organizations had been denied funding because, they were told, foundation resources were limited. Jessica's role in exposing the scandal was mentioned, but not emphasized. Sarah had protected her identity as much as possible, referring to her only as a source with direct knowledge of family finances. Still, within hours of publication, Jessica's name was trending on social media. The cancelled Hartford Monroe wedding became tabloid fodder, with speculative articles passing every detail of her relationship with William. Catherine Hartford issued a statement through her lawyers, denying all wrongdoing, and announcing defamation lawsuits against the Times and unnamed individuals who have spread malicious falsehoods. But the evidence was damning, and by Thursday morning, the Connecticut Attorney General's office had announced a formal investigation into the Foundation's finances. Jessica watched the news coverage from her parents' living room, feeling both vindicated and terrified. Her phone remained off except for calls from Sarah Chen and the lawyer her parents had hired, a no-nonsense litigator named Patricia Rodriguez, who specialized in protecting whistleblowers. "The Hartfords will come after you hard," Patricia warned during their first meeting. "They'll try to discredit you, paint you as a jilted fiancé seeking revenge. We need to stay ahead of their narrative." Sure enough, by Friday afternoon, William had given an interview to the New York Post, portraying Jessica as emotionally unstable and vindictive. "She couldn't handle the pressure of marrying into a prominent family," he claimed. "When my mother tried to help her manage wedding stress, Jessica lashed out with these absurd accusations. It's really sad to watch someone you cared about unravel like this. The article included photos of William looking solemn and dignified outside the Greenwich estate, alongside unflattering snapshots of Jessica from social media, caught mid-laugh with her mouth open, looking exhausted at the end of a charity 5K, wearing gym clothes at the grocery store. The implication was clear. She was common, unstable, unworthy of the Hartford name. Jessica's friends rallied immediately, posting their own photos and stories contradicting William's narrative. Her former colleagues from the non-profit sector published a joint statement defending her integrity and work ethic. And crucially, 3 other women came forward with their own stories about the Hartford family. 2 former employees who had been pressured to falsify foundation documents, and a woman who had briefly dated William in college and experienced similar patterns of charm, followed by control and violence. The narrative began to shift. What the Hartfords had intended as character assassination became instead a portrait of institutional corruption and abuse of power. More foundation donors came forward expressing outrage at the misuse of their contributions. Non-profit directors held a press conference demanding accountability and full restitution of stolen funds. Patricia Rodriguez filed assault charges on Jessica's behalf, providing the police photos of her bruised arm and copies of William's threatening text messages. "We're not letting them bury this," Patricia said firmly. "They're used to making problems disappear with money and lawyers. Not this time." The Connecticut Attorney General's investigation moved with surprising speed, perhaps accelerated by the intense media scrutiny. Within 2 weeks, forensic accountants had confirmed the Times reporting. Catherine Hartford had systematically looted the family foundation, using sophisticated financial structures to hide the theft. The shell companies had purchased real estate, art, luxury cars, all titled in Catherine's name or the names of family members. Criminal charges followed: wire fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement. Catherine was arrested at the Greenwich estate on a grey December morning, photographers capturing her being led to a police car in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally shattered. William was named as a person of interest in the investigation, though not immediately charged. Prosecutors were building a case to determine how much he had known about his mother's activities. For Jessica, the vindication brought unexpected complications. She received death threats from Hartford family supporters who saw her as a traitor who had destroyed a respectable American dynasty. She lost friends who valued their connections to wealthy families more than questions of justice or truth. Her former employer, nervous about association with scandal, suggested she look for work elsewhere. But she also received hundreds of messages of support from domestic violence survivors, grateful that someone had held the Hartfords accountable, from non-profit workers who had struggled with inadequate funding while Catherine enjoyed her stolen wealth, from women who had experienced similar patterns of abuse in affluent families where money bought silence. One message came from Diana Torres, director of a women's shelter in Bridgeport that should have received Hartford Foundation funding. 23 women were turned away from our shelter last year because we didn't have enough beds, Diana wrote. 3 of them went back to abusive partners and ended up hospitalized. Your courage may have saved lives by ensuring future funding actually reaches the people who need it. Jessica read that message over and over, letting it anchor her when doubt crept in. When she wondered if she'd made the right choice walking away from security and comfort, she had made enemies among the powerful and connected. She had complicated her own future in ways she couldn't fully predict, but she had also refused to be complicit in cruelty disguised as charity, in violence hidden behind wealth. By late December, the Hartford Foundation had been placed in receivership, with an independent board appointed to restructure operations and ensure proper distribution of remaining funds. Catherine faced trial in the spring, with prosecutors seeking significant prison time. William had hired a separate legal team and was reportedly cooperating with investigators in exchange for immunity, testifying about his mother's financial schemes while maintaining he had no knowledge of the embezzlement until Jessica's allegations. Jessica didn't believe him, but she no longer cared what William Hartford believed or said. He had made his choices, she had made hers, and she was learning to live with the consequences of choosing truth over comfort, principle over privilege. The trial of Catherine Hartford began on a cold March morning. The courthouse in Stamford, surrounded by media trucks and protesters. Jessica attended every day of the 3-week proceeding, sitting in the gallery with Patricia Rodriguez beside her. watching as prosecutors methodically dismantled Catherine's defense. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, wire transfers, emails directing lawyers to create shell companies, testimony from accountants and financial advisors who had raised concerns and been fired for their trouble. Catherine's lawyers attempted to portray her as a victim of bad advice from corrupt advisors, but the prosecution demonstrated that she had personally directed every major transaction, personally benefited from every diverted dollar. William testified on day 9, looking pale and diminished, in an expensive suit that suddenly seemed like a costume. He claimed his mother had always handled foundation finances independently, that he had trusted her completely, that he had been devastated to learn about the embezzlement. Under cross-examination, he admitted he had confronted Jessica not because he believed his mother was innocent, but because he feared the scandal would damage the family business interests. "So you knew the allegations might be true," the prosecutor pressed, "and your concern was protecting your family's reputation and fortune, not discovering the truth." William's silence was answer enough. Jessica felt nothing watching him squirm on the witness stand, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a hollow recognition of who he had always been beneath the charm. She had loved an illusion, a performance of decency masking entitlement and moral vacancy. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Catherine Hartford was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $15.8 million in restitution, the stolen funds plus interest. She showed no emotion as the sentence was read, maintaining her icy composure even in defeat. Outside the courthouse, Jessica gave a brief statement to the assembled media. "This was never about revenge or a broken relationship," she said, her voice steady despite the camera flashes and shouted questions. "It was about accountability. Millions of dollars meant to help vulnerable people, survivors of domestic violence, at-risk children, families in crisis, were stolen by someone who claimed to be their champion. Today's verdict affirms that no one is above the law, regardless of wealth or status." Sarah Chen's follow-up article in The Times focused on the broader implications of the case, how domestic violence advocacy organizations were chronically underfunded, while wealthy donors sometimes treated charitable foundations as personal piggy banks, how affluent families used money and connections to avoid scrutiny and accountability. The piece mentioned Jessica's current work. She had taken a position with a non-profit that supported whistleblowers and survivors of domestic violence in affluent communities, combining her professional expertise with hard-earned personal experience. The months following the trial brought gradual healing and unexpected opportunities. Jessica spoke at conferences about financial transparency in philanthropic organizations. She consulted with lawmakers drafting legislation to increase oversight of private foundations. She shared her story with domestic violence advocates working with high-net-worth victims who faced unique barriers to leaving abusive relationships, threats of expensive litigation, social ostracization, fears that no one would believe them because abuse doesn't happen to people like us. Her relationship with her parents deepened, the crisis having stripped away years of superficial distance that had grown during her time in William's world. Tom and Ellen Monroe had never been wealthy, but they had been honest, principled, loving, qualities Jessica had undervalued in her pursuit of a different kind of life. She apologized for that blindness, and they forgave her with the grace that had defined their marriage of 35 years. By summer, the Hartford family business empire was being sold off piece by piece to pay Catherine's restitution and legal fees. William had moved to California, reportedly working in his cousin's tech startup, his social media presence scrubbed of references to his Connecticut heritage. The Greenwich estate was on the market for $28 million, its manicured grounds and elegant rooms now tainted by association with scandal and criminality. Jessica drove past it once in late August, on her way to visit Diana Torres at the Bridgeport Women's Shelter that had finally received full foundation funding under the new independent board. The estate's gates were closed, the windows dark, the fountain in the circular driveway turned off and empty. It looked smaller than she remembered, less imposing, just another expensive house hiding ordinary human failures behind impressive facades. At the shelter, Jessica met with survivors who were rebuilding their lives, finding jobs, securing housing, escaping violence that had nearly destroyed them. One woman, Maria, had fled with her 3 children from a husband who had used his wealth and business connections to threaten her into silence for years. "I thought no one would believe me," Maria said quietly. He's respected in the community. He donates to charities. Everyone thinks he's wonderful. People believe what's convenient, Jessica replied. What lets them avoid uncomfortable truths? But that doesn't make the truth any less real. She thought about that conversation later, sitting on her parents' back patio as evening fell and fireflies began their twilight dance across the lawn. She had lost the life she thought she wanted, the wealth, the status, the security of marrying into power, but she had gained something more valuable, the knowledge that she could face hard truths and make difficult choices, that she could choose integrity over comfort, principle over privilege. The bruises William had left on her arm had faded months ago, but she still remembered their ache, a physical reminder of violence lurking beneath expensive surfaces. Catherine Hartford would spend years in prison, her reputation destroyed, her fortune depleted. William Hartford would live with the knowledge that he had chosen his mother's criminality over his fiancée's trust, that he had defended theft from domestic violence victims to protect his inheritance. And Jessica Monroe would continue building a different kind of life, one defined not by the money in her bank account or the prestige of her connections, but by her willingness to stand for something larger than herself. It wasn't the life she had imagined standing in that Greenwich bedroom holding evidence of Catherine's crimes. It was harder, more uncertain, less comfortable, but it was hers, earned through courage she hadn't known she possessed, built on a foundation of truth rather than beautiful lies. And that, Jessica had learned, made all the difference.